Okay, so welcome everyone to the webinar From Science to Action, Evidence-Based Programs for Nature and Health Communities. My name is Holly Campbell and I will be the host for the webinar today. I'm an Extension Associate with Southern Regional Extension Forestry working in urban forestry and wildland fire education and outreach. As part of the Cooperative Extension System, our office develops educational products and resources to support regional forestry and natural resource programs across the southeastern U.S. region, such as this webinar today. So our website's sref.info if you'd like to learn more about what we do. I'd like to take a moment to thank the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension for co-hosting our webinar through Zoom today. So our speaker today is Dr. Kathleen Wolfe from the University of Washington. Before introducing Dr. Wolfe, I will provide a short introduction to the series that this webinar is part of, and I'll briefly talk about some of the benefits of urban trees and forests. As we may have some on the call who are unfamiliar with this information, it may be new to them, so I'll go over that. So today's webinar is part of a larger series entitled Understanding Urban and Community Forests, an Extension webinar series. The series was planned by our office, Southern Regional Extension Forestry, with input from several cooperative extension urban and community forestry experts in the southern region. So this slide includes our planning partners for the series, and their input was really key on selecting topics and speakers. The series is designed for educators, specifically cooperative extension county agents and other educators in extension. However, the series is also or could be relevant to other natural resource educators, arborists, urban foresters, and much more. So regardless of your work focus, you're all welcome to join today's webinar and any in the series. So the goal of the series, which includes 12 webinars in all, is two-part. One, to increase extension educators' knowledge of research-based urban and community forestry information, and two, to provide educational resources that support delivery of that information to the public. So ultimately, the series aims to increase Extension's role in urban and community forestry education and outreach. We're hoping that the series will reach not only Extension personnel focused in horticulture, urban forestry, and natural resources, but also Extension involved in focus areas like family and consumer sciences and other areas where appropriate. So this slide includes some of the other webinars in the series and also the link on the bottom, sref.info, you can find all of the webinars listed. So I encourage you to go there. And actually I will include that in the chat box here, the link if you want to see some of the other ones. Okay, so several of you probably are like, what's extension? I have no idea. So I just wanted to do a little brief overview of what cooperative extension is. So cooperative extension was formalized through the Smith-Lever Act in 1914, so it's been around for a while. It established the U.S. Department of Agriculture, otherwise known as USDA, partnership with land-grant universities to apply research and provide non-formal agricultural education. So Congress created the extension system specifically to address rural agricultural issues. Today, however, Extension has expanded its focus to match changes in society and economics, providing research-based education in areas like family and consumer sciences, forestry and natural resources, youth education, and much more. So popular extension programs a lot of people are familiar with is 4-H and the Master Gardener program. Extension is a trusted information resource in communities, and for those of you who are not part of Extension, we make great partners to disseminate information to the public. So please keep this in mind on your next urban and community forestry project that includes an educational component. Though several Extension educators provide urban and community forestry information to their communities, the amount of Extension educators in this area tend to be few. So we really hope that these webinars help increase Extension's role in urban and community forestry education and outreach. So now I just wanted to go over some of the benefits of urban and community forests. So urban and community forests provide numerous benefits, as you can see from this slide. From helping clean our water and air to reducing wind speed and noise. Trees also provide a sense of place and connection, beauty and food. They also reduce our energy bills and increase our property value. And as Dr. Wolfe will explain momentarily, urban and community forests improve our health and well-being. So I would now like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Kathleen Wolfe. Dr. Wolf is a research social scientist at the College of the Environment at the University of Washington and is a research associate with the USDA Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station on a research program about human dimensions of urban forestry and urban greening. Today's webinar is a continuation of a webinar Dr. Wolf gave through this series on March 14th entitled Nature and Health in Communities, a Review of Best Available Science. That webinar covered the science behind delivery recommendations that Dr. Wolf will provide today. So I'll provide a link to the March 14th webinar in the chat box and also at the end of the webinar today. Okay, Dr. Wolf, are you ready?
Good to go. Thank you, Holly.
Sure.
All right, quick check. Are we seeing my first slide?
I gotcha. You're on.
Very good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Pleasure to be here again. As Holly mentioned, about 2 weeks ago, I offered some of the current research, the most recent, as well as a longer historic perspective on the research about our experiences of trees and nature more generally, and health, public health in communities. Today, what I'm going to do is share with you a variety of programs that are evidence-based. They're emerging very quickly and in many places, not only in our nation, but across the world, a response to the recognition of the importance of nature in our everyday environments, in our everyday experiences, and ways to engage people and communities more directly in those sorts of experiences. So here's an outline of my presentation today. First of all, for those of you who did not attend the last webinar, I'll do a very quick overview of this evidence base. But most of the time that I have with you today, I will spend on descriptions of programs that I've heard about and the relationship of those programs to some key studies that have motivated people to take action in their communities. And I suspect that this information might be quite valuable for people who are working in extension or working in public health in their communities who want to see action on the ground. And that is the focus of today's webinar. Once again, a health outlook is more comprehensive than just the absence of disease or not being ill or not having to go to the hospital. The World Health Organization decades ago recognized the importance of a broad set of characteristics and attributes and situations in our lives that promote health. And the public health community uses the term social determinants. It's quite prominent now in public health policy, this idea that not only do our individual traits or circumstances affect our health, they're important, genetics, of course, lifestyle, and so on, but there's a broad array of circumstances that are the upstream conditions, if you will, of good health. So we need access to good education and jobs and housing. But I offer to you that the research of nearly 40 years suggests that having gardens, parks, trees, nearby nature in our everyday lives is also important to sustain health. This research about this topic is quite diverse and found in many sources, many disciplines, and so it can be difficult to access and to sort of take stock of what's the current knowledge. To that effect, we have created this portal called Green Cities, Good Health at the University of Washington. And it offers, if you go to the website, it offers then about a dozen topics related to health in the most general sense. It includes health at a community level, it includes social cohesion, safety and crime, and so on. But for each one of these topics, then you'll find a very brief introduction followed by fast facts. These are some of the statistical highlights that we have found as we have screened literally hundreds of articles for each topic. And then there's a longer summary, a longer essay, all of it fully cited should you want to go to the original sources. And this work, our work on Green Cities Good Health, has led to some additional tools and publications. So here's one that we did in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, and it's called Outside Our Doors. And it's written more to a policy sort of audience. It's written oriented to more elected officials and people who make decisions within our local governments. And again, available as a PDF. If you Google the title and Nature Conservancy, it should come right up. Here's another one released by the Forest Service just a couple of months ago called Urban Nature for Human Health and Well-Being. And while I was a technical advisor on this, it is not the same content. It's similar in approach, but has a little different organization and orientation than Green Cities Good Health, but I think you'll find it valuable as well. My most current research is to take what we know about a subset, a small subset of these nature benefits, and try to understand economic values. And I won't talk about that at any length here, but if you'd like to see a summary of that information, this brochure, Nature's Riches, and again, if you Google the Nature Conservancy and Nature's Riches, this should come right up as a PDF. Very recently, we have translated this to Spanish and Arabic, thanks to the Forest Service having an interest in sharing this information more broadly and in more diverse communities. So that was a very quick review, reminder of the extent of this research. It spans nearly 40 years. The article database that we have collected to support Green Cities Good Health now numbers over 4,000 publications, all from English language journals, peer-reviewed publications, and representing work that's now happening all over the world. It's really remarkable, and there's been a surge, just in the last decade, quite a surge of this work. In my mind, we have a critical mass of understanding of nature and health response. And I think other organizations and people are responding to that by developing programs. They're figuring out how to translate this research to activities that engage more people, engage more communities in enjoying and interacting with nature for health outcomes. So that's where I'm going to go now. I'm going to share some of the programs that I've heard about and how they relate to certain studies, key studies. I'll just say here, I don't know a whole lot about these programs. I've become kind of a pollinator in this realm, in that I'm invited to do a lot of public talks. So I hear about a program here and a program there, and I don't know a lot of detail, but I'm hoping that by providing the names and some of the contact information for these programs, if you have an interest, you can go and look at them and learn more about them on your own. So let's get started here. A resource that is really valuable if you are working in youth and children's programs and want to look at ideas for how to engage kids from school time to after hours to families that have younger children. This is a remarkable resource, the Children and Nature Network. And it continues, the team there at Children and Nature Network continue to compile the latest research, but they also offer ideas for programs, learning curricula, and so on. A really wonderful resource. By the way, as this proceeds, again, I'm kind of collecting these programs' ideas to share with multiple audiences. So perhaps you or your group or your office is working on a nature experience-based program oriented to health. If so, please, if you would, list the name of the program and its location in the Q&A box, because we'll collect these and I might then follow up and try to learn more myself about these programs that are happening. Here's another program I'm hearing about more and more. I'm familiar with a series of these forest schools that are now in Seattle. They're fabulous. They're typically preschools, and very popular, often waiting lists for enrollment. But children are outdoors as much and as often as is reasonable given local weather conditions. There's formal learning. There you see on the top right, you see learning or attending to motor skills, fine as well as major motor skills. Outdoor and play. And on the bottom left there, maybe learning some social skills too. Maybe there's a better way to tell your friend that you want to use the microscope. But nonetheless, these are year-round programs for children and now being studied. I understand that there are some research teams working with some of the forest schools. We know that trees, parks, gardens are so important to encourage, maybe even motivate people to get out and be active. And physical activity is absolutely important to, again, as an upstream intervention to prevent diabetes, to prevent being overweight, to reduce stress, and so on. Many, many benefits. The secret is, though, you have to get out of the car, right? So important. Has to be walking and cycling time. What do we see emerging from this research is there are many, many walking programs. Some of them are focused on particular social groups, children, elders, families. Some of them are an effort to also help introduce a key park or an open space to a nearby community, engaging people and welcoming them to come and learn not only about their health, but also about the amazing natural resources that you can find in one's community. An interesting twist that I've heard about recently is walk with your doc, where a physician or a nurse will be a part of the walking program. And while you're out in the park walking about, these professionals are fielding questions about health or informing people about how to better make use of walking programs in terms of frequency or how much time you're out or maybe goals for heart rate and so on. This is all merging into a program that has been around for about a decade, but is now becoming more broadly recognized, and it's called Parks Prescription. And this is literally where a doctor, a nurse, a medical professional recognizes that a patient may be overweight, may have pre-diabetes symptoms, may have some issues with cardiovascular disease, and they literally prescribe that that person go out and engage in routine walking or routine activity as part of their lifestyle to try to minimize or reduce their chronic health conditions. And again, studies are now starting to overlay on these sorts of programs. Parks RX is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that is about a year old now, and it offers toolkits, it offers guidance, it offers suggestions for how to implement a Parks prescription program. And the way that this has happened in Washington, D.C., there's one physician there that has been particularly strong in mobilizing this activity. His name is Dr. Zarr, Z-A-R-R, and he has worked with the local parks departments to create a GIS database where if a patient receives a prescription, they can look at the database and discover what are the parks and open spaces around them and what are the facilities that are available that would enable greater activity. And I'm seeing that there are people putting up activities, nature-based health programs and activities. That's great. Please, if any of you have other examples, it'd be wonderful to share those. I would appreciate it, as well as others on the webinar. All right, here's another one, Hike It Baby. This started in Portland, Oregon. There was a young woman who was very active outdoors. She had her first child, would go out for walks and find that parks were not very well set up for a person with a young child, a parent or a caregiver. So she has worked with the local parks to create spaces where one can stop and take a break, where one can change a diaper, where one can feed your child, and so on. And it has become a nonprofit, and there are Hike It Baby ambassadors now active in various communities across the United States. Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is this wonderful idea that has come out of Japan, has been studied extensively in Japan, also South Korea, and now studies in other regions. And they have found that being immersed in nature, in a forest area, be it this sort of experience, or be it simply just going out for a walk for a couple of hours, half day, maybe even a weekend away, has remarkable and positive health consequences, to the point now there's a network system of forest bathing stations in Japan. Here in the US, I just learned about this organization. It's based in California, and it's an association of nature and forest therapy guides and programs. So again, if you go to this website, you might find some great ideas. They also offer trainings for people who want to become therapy guides or who want to start local programs. And I understand that, again, this is a fairly new outreach or a fairly new organization, but gaining quite a following. All right, back to research. Considering mental health. So I've been talking about physical health, child development, but in terms of mental health, there are a number of studies showing there are also benefits, particularly from being active outdoors, and active in a very calm sort of way, simply going out walking. This is not about strenuous exercise or long distance runs or cycling. It's simply about taking a little time each day away or within your lifestyle to have these times where stress is reduced and encouraging better health generally. But in this study, very interesting, the respondents or the subjects in the study had portable EEG, brain scan devices, portable devices in backpacks, and they were walking around in different places within a city, some more green, some more built, and analyzing those the brainwave data. Here's what they found: evidence of lower frustration and meditation kind of brainwaves that in one's life, those sorts of brainwaves suggest sort of an alertness, a readiness, but a sense combined with a sense of calm. Another study done by Mark Berman, he's with the University of Chicago, and this was done in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where people who were clinically noted, or oh my gosh, the word. Anyway, they were found to have major depression and were being treated by physicians. They were recruited, they were randomly assigned to do these two different walk situations, the red being more built, the green being still within a city environment, but having more vegetation, including walking within an arboretum. And finding that after these fairly short walks, less than an hour, more positive mood, again, associated with depression, but also better cognitive abilities, and that is the ability to focus and perform very specific tasks. All right, program response to this. I am hearing more and more about mental well-being programs, and here's one from a public garden near Seattle called Blowdale Reserve. And it's a beautiful setting that combines old growth forest, Pacific Northwest old growth forest, as well as manicured and highly designed gardens. And so the participants in this program, they sign up for a lengthy period, 10 weeks, and they, on a routine or on a scheduled basis, they come in. It's a series of walks, journaling, group discussions, and so on, all to the end of a mental health, a better mental health outcome and stress reduction. In the workplace, my own workplace here at the University of Washington, I am offered mindfulness training, and I've heard that from colleagues who work in government agencies, a number of them, where one is on a voluntary basis able to take some time out from a little time out each week and attend this sort of training. And studies show that even a modest amount of time doing this can have some really powerful results. One, again, is brain electrical activity, more positive, and enabling better cognitive performance when you're back at the desk. Reduce stress, and in some instances, even an increase in immune function, much better ability to resist disease and illness over time. So more and more, I am hearing about nature as an element in mindfulness training and personal mindfulness activity. And there are various elements of nature spaces, and these spaces can be quite small. This doesn't mean you have to get out to large areas or go out beyond the city to achieve mindfulness, though that is sometimes promoted, but it's not necessary. Within a small space, you can find focus. You can find a feature, a flower, water, pollinators, insects, birds. There are things then that can draw your attention in a way that it enables the relaxation and recovery of your mind. Soft fascination is really an interesting idea, and it was promoted by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, who years ago, decades ago, literally developed this idea of the attention restoration theory. And what they found in their research is that focusing on those interesting things in nature that don't take a lot of directed attention, you don't have to make a lot of effort to focus on these interesting things that are softly fascinating, helps and enables mental recovery. Soft fascination, again, offered by the texture of plants, wind through the trees, watching clouds, pollinators moving about. For instance, in this image on the left, you see some lavender plants. I have a patch of lavender in my garden. And in the summer, when the bees are very active pollinating, I will go out and sit in the middle of that patch and just watch them. And it's fascinating to see their movement, the differences of the pollinators, and so on. Very fascinating in a very mindful kind of way. All right. We also see in a variety of studies that nature seems to enhance or at least helps people be more creative. And this is particularly important for children. Again, going back, I'm hearing about programs where the forest schools, for instance, are not only about physical activity and learning, but about children engaging with nature and developing creativity and thinking through and using imagination, with nature being, elements of nature being the prompts for those sorts of activities. Creativity, tests of creativity for adults have found that, yes, the combination of activity, moving around, as well as nature settings appears to help us with the creative process. This being one study where subjects were assigned to sit inside, be active on a treadmill, be active outdoors, and also moving about in a wheelchair. And they found that walking outside was the activity that produced the most sort of creative responses in the defined way that they measured this. Another study that was done in Denmark used an interview protocol, talking with a variety of people, engineers, artists, architects, and so on. and finding that experiences of nature supported more flexible thinking and also helped him to recharge their ability to attend to tasks. They found that nature experiences were possibly most helpful in two phases of the creative process. The first is the preparation phase, and that is when you first take on a project and there's this swirl of possibilities and there's this swirl of ways that you might approach the project. At that time, going out, being in nature, out walking was the time to help sort those possibilities and start to move to action. Later then, in the incubation phase, once you've settled on some decisions, and then you're thinking through the details, the nitty-gritty of how to take this project to completion, again, these creative professionals found that being out in nature was helpful during this incubation process, and finding that having adequate space and a sense of serenity in that nature surrounding aided in the process. I am hearing then, here's this program idea. I'm hearing more and more about walking meetings. Why? Well, first, walking meetings are an opportunity to get up and get away from the desk. And that's important because the Mayo Clinic is now saying that sitting for long periods of time, particularly at work, is equivalent to smoking in terms of cardiovascular disease. So they recommend every 2 hours, get up and move. And I try to do that in my own work now. I try to get up, take a little bit of a walk, at the very least in the building, even better, get outside somewhere for a short while. 15, 20 minutes, there you are, very helpful. Also, walking meetings are being suggested because of a different energy and creativity regarding ideas and getting things done. And I now also have adopted this on occasion, particularly with students. I will suggest when we're meeting about a project that we get up and we go for a walk and we talk through things. And I do find there's a very different dynamic as compared to sitting in a room and sitting in chairs and talking through things. So it's an alternative and an option that can be helpful for a variety of reasons. I think that this idea of the walking meeting was recognized historically more so than it is now. In my travels about, I have seen what are called philosophers' walks in different communities, and they're associated with places of learning. For instance, the University of Heidelberg in Germany has a philosopher's walk that is a linear walk along a river. In Kyoto, there is a philosopher's walk, and it is in downtown or in inner city Kyoto along a stream course. Very nice, shaded by trees, but it's a very narrow area, a very narrow zone within the city. So I think that, and in the past, we were more inclined to walk and talk as scholars, as workers, and so on. And so maybe that's something we can revive in our lives. I've talked now about programs based on science, based on the evidence that apply to kind of general population. My last two examples are more specific to certain people or groups of people, and I'll start here with veterans. I have participated in some workshops for veterans that are reintegrating after service. And there are, of course, wilderness therapy programs. And so veterans can find programs where they're involved. I noticed there was one example in the Q&A box, horse therapy, equine programs, backpacking, sailing, kayaking, camping, and so on. I suggest to you that this is one end of a spectrum of nature benefit for veterans. In my discussions with physicians who are treating veterans in hospital systems, this is what I've come to learn. That in the transition from military service to civilian service, almost every person who has served, particularly if they have had multiple deployments, has some level of stress from those experiences. And we hear about PTSD, and that, of course, is the most extreme expression of this. But most people have some sort of stress residual because of their active duty. And so there's good reasons for offering nature-based programs for people who are both still in the service and may have recently left duty. What we see in these individuals, and again, this comes from various workshops that I've attended, is there's such a strong sense of camaraderie among people who have served. And there's also, they are very purpose and mission oriented. Give us a task, give us a goal, and they are on it. They have a very high sense of commitment and are willing to exert themselves to the max in order to achieve purpose or mission. And many of them have very advanced skill sets, and those skill sets may be technical, they may be equipment oriented, or they may be people management. So what I'm getting at here, and I haven't heard about this happening very much yet, but I'm hearing more and more signals that there's a realization that when one is out on a wilderness therapy program, eventually you have to go home. You have to go back to family. You have to go back to community. And I have also heard that there are many families and children who have been emotionally and physically affected by the absence of a parent while on duty and while deployed. So I think there's an opportunity here to bring those incredible skills, knowledge, and commitment that veterans bring to possibly to urban greening stewardship, to urban forestry programs, and to aiding families and individuals in reintegrating with their community using these sorts of programs, parks, public gardens, trees, neighborhoods, and so on. My last example here is, again, a special population. There's just a trickle of science, but very interesting, about offenders in prison and their reaction to greening. Here's one example. This is a high security prison in Oregon, and the inmates get very little time away from their cells, and they were given the option of going into this blue room that had an ongoing screening of nature scenes versus very limited physical exercise outside the cell. And it's preliminary because it's a very small sample. There are just not that many people that could be studied, but nonetheless, here you see some of the outcomes, including fewer infractions, which then has implications for the staff of these facilities, perhaps lower stress, perhaps less burnout if they're not engaging with the inmates in negative ways. So the program related to prisons, jails, and so on that I'm aware of is sustainability in prisons. And this is really a remarkable program. I learned about this several years ago. It started here in Washington State at Evergreen College in partnership with the Department of Corrections for the state. And Nalini Narkarni is an ecologist at Evergreen. She's now at Utah. But she helped found this organization because she was doing ecological restoration all across the state and was in need of very specific organisms, insects, mosses, plants, grasses. And so she had this crazy idea. She went to the Department of Corrections director and said, hey, you've got a bunch of people with a lot of time on their hands. Could we possibly ask them to grow these organisms? And of course, they laughed her off, but she persisted. And now the Sustainability in Prisons program does a variety of activities. One is to grow these materials for ecological restoration, but also now they are doing composting, on-site composting. They are doing on-site walking programs. They are engaging inmates in the grounds management and maintenance, so they're out more and being active. And they're using these programs that are becoming quite popular as behavior incentives. Positive behavior, the reward is that you will be able to participate in these activities that break up the monotony and the boredom and the frustration probably of being in these sorts of facilities. Remarkable program, and has been adopted and adapted in a number of states around the U.S. So there you are. That was, again, as with the first webinar, really a whirlwind overview. In the last webinar, and a little bit, a sampling of this one, I've sketched out some of the highlights of nearly 40 years of research, the knowledge base about the importance of nearby nature and people's experiences from children across our life cycle, from cradle to grave, babies, children, adults, elders, and so on. And we really have a critical mass of evidence, as I said earlier in our database that supports Green Cities Good Health, where we're at about a little over 4,000 peer-reviewed articles coming from all over the country, all over the world. And consequently, we're seeing a surge in programming as there's this effort to take this knowledge into the lives, into the facilities, into the schools, into the workplaces, and even into the prisons of our society and places. What I see happening is this becomes a remarkable opportunity for collaboration and partnership. And for those of you who are extension agents, I know that you are working in a variety of situations in your communities. So bringing the health evidence as well as examples of these health-oriented programs may help you then in forwarding or expanding on the various collaborations and partnerships that you already have. For example, hospitals are becoming more interested in partnering with regard to health because they don't know a whole lot about the gardens and the greening, and so maybe some sort of collaboration of master gardeners and hospitals for therapy gardens can be a possibility. Schools, of course, principals and superintendents are now more open to the idea. Parks prescriptions, contacts with clinics, and directly with the professionals, the medical professionals that assist people and help them to achieve more healthy lifestyles. Lots of possibilities. And in addition to that, public health departments. So not so long ago, I would talk to people in public health departments about this, and they were not very receptive because their orientation was more what is traditionally called environmental health, and that is to address the risks and the toxins, air pollution, water pollution, and so on. They weren't necessarily looking at what we could call the salutogenic or the positive aspects, but now that they're more interested in the upstream effects on public health to try to introduce more preventive practices, they too are becoming more interested in parks, gardens, trees as an element in more healthful communities. So I'll end here, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Some of you might have questions. In addition, thank you for those of you who have been providing the ideas and examples of programs that you're aware of. But anyway, as I was preparing for this webinar, I stumbled into this brochure called Outreach Services Strategies for All Communities. And it was done a little bit of time ago by a coalition of organizations called Alliance for Community Trees. And ACT has morphed into now a different organization, but nonetheless, you might find this brochure helpful because it does a walkthrough. It doesn't focus on content, it focuses on process. How do you take an idea or a possible program and walk through and implement it and engage with the community to see it happen? I found it an interesting set of ideas if I were to try to start a program in my own community, or say in my daughter's school, something like that. So again, if you go to that link, you should be able to download the PDF. And if you are interested, I shared the link, Green Cities, Good Health. Here's my research resume, if you will, my digital resume with related topics and related research that a variety of team members, partners, collaborators have worked on over the years, if you care to take a look at some of that. And from here now, I will exit my slides and will return to Holly. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Wolf. That was an excellent overview of evidence-based programs for nature and health communities. I was really taken with your use of a few references to being a quote-unquote pollinator of these programs, and then your knowledge that these programs, if implemented, could help be an upstream intervention to other health problems. And so as educators, as I see from in the chat box that there's a lot of extension folks at the webinar here today, and as educators we can all help play that role as a pollinator of this information. So I was going to remind you to please type any programs that you know about or are working on in the Q&A, and include, if you can, the name, location of where they are, even if that's online, and a brief description, or just, even a name is fine. As well, if you have any questions for Dr. Wolf, you can go ahead and type those into the chat box, or sorry, not the chat box, the Q&A. And we can share these resources with all of you after the webinar. Also, I wanted to mention anything that Dr. Wolf mentioned through her webinar. Again, I want to remind that this webinar is going to be archived and it'll be available on demand through the same link that you through the webinar portal, forestry webinars.net, which I have up on the screen right now. And you can watch that webinar again and get some of those links. Let's see, I also wanted to mention the part 1 of this webinar, which was on March 14th. We had some really great questions at the end of that webinar that Dr. Wolf answered, and we would love to share some of those questions and answers with you. Let's see, before we have Dr. Wolf answer some of these questions, I just wanted to go over some of the information on this closing slide. Okay, so the first webinar that I referred to, which is Nature and Health in Communities, a Review of Best Available Science. This was the webinar by Dr. Wolf on March 14th, which was part 1. You can find this as listed as quote unquote on demand at www.forestrywebinars.net. If you have any questions about the webinar, please contact me at this email address. And if you, again, I put this in the chat box, but if you want to look at any of the other webinars we have in this 12-part series, you can go to sref.info and click on the link to that. And again, the webinar is going to be on demand, and it's probably going to take me about 24 hours to get it loaded up, so it won't be available immediately. And lastly, we have a short satisfaction survey of the webinar that we would love if any of you could take time to go through. It's just a few questions. It helps us improve our webinars in the future. Also, if you elected to receive any ISA or SAF credits for today's webinar, you're going to return to your open browser window through the webinar portal to continue that process to get those credits. Okay, let's look at some of these questions. Looks like we have a lot of great program recommendations. Again, I'm going to share these with everyone. And I know that you guys may not be able to see all these questions. Okay, let's see. First question, Dr. Wolf. Has there been any comparative research done to show different healing effects between different natural environments?
Let's see. So,
if you know.
yeah. So the many studies that have been done have used a variety of approaches to. All right. So let me back up a little bit. if you think about research design, you have a situation, a group of people, and an intervention. I'm talking about research in the most basic way. It's almost like the medical model, right? You have a population of people, you introduce an intervention, and then you measure an outcome. So the outcomes are quite varied, as I've expressed on these two webinars: mental health, physical health, cognitive function. I haven't even touched on community benefits such as social cohesion and crime reduction. The intervention studies are quite varied as well. Some of them use satellite remote sensing, NDVI, or they use LIDAR to just say vegetation cover. Some use tree location. Some use access to parks, difference ranges, proximity to parks. Some use how much time people actually spend in parks, and so on. So I would say that there has been a wide array of different studies looking at different vegetation components, but I wouldn't say that there has been comparative research, at least that I'm aware of. And the reason for that, I think, is that the health outcomes are quite specific in these studies. And frankly, you know, I have a professional degree in landscape architecture. So what I bring to all this is I have some sense of how you design outdoor spaces for human experience. And then the PhD work that I've done is environmental psychology. So that's about evaluating and learning how indeed people do respond to these spaces. I would say that people don't, they don't look at a tree and say, oh, trees will reduce stress. Oh, there's a park. So I'll be physically active there, and that will reduce obesity. I would say that what is important is, rather than the comparative aspects of different natural environments, is how do we attain a baseline level of quality green in our communities? And then what are the important aspects of people's encounter with that green? So to me, the more important question is the comparative benefits of green exposure. And I worked with a team of people. We published an article last year in Environmental Perspectives about a research agenda regarding urban natural environments and health outcomes. And that was really the perspective we took, is not so much what are the different green elements. What we proposed was we need to know more about dosage, how much time in green, how often, how does it differ for different people. We suggest that there are important policy questions. In other words, these programs that I shared with you are kind of random. There's no sense of coherence. People are inspired and are doing really interesting things, but there's no sort of national sense or even state level sense of what's going on. So that is another issue that could be initiated and studied, is policy level stuff. So there you are. The long answer is I don't know about comparative of the green environments, but I think more fruitful research would be about the comparative advantages and needs of different health response.
Sorry, I was talking and I was muted. So that looks like the only question that we got. We do have about 6 minutes left, so I thought what I may do, if you think that I should do this, Dr. Wolf, I was just going to read some of these program names that were recommended. What do you think?
Yeah, that'd be fine. And Naomi Sachs, Dr. Sachs, who is now at Cornell University and the director of the Therapeutic Landscapes Network, another great resource for programs and the evidence base if you are working with medical facilities, clinics, and so on that are interested in healing gardens and therapy gardens. Wonderful resource. But Naomi pointed out that research has been done by Dr. Zhang and Dr. Sullivan, and they did indeed evaluate the degree of canopy cover, forest canopy cover, and health response, particularly stress reduction. So that's another thing to look at if you're interested in, again, this comparative effect of different natural environments. Also, I note that Dr. Sachs has put up that there is some research on preferences about desert versus more temperate, and most of these studies have been done in more temperate environments, northern latitudes. And I have had a number of questions about desert, very different vegetation, and how people respond. Naomi, if you wouldn't mind putting up a reference about that desert work or pass it on through email, I'd be interested in looking at that. Thanks again, Dr. Sachs, for your comments and introduction to the Therapeutic Landscapes Network.
Yeah, Dr. Sachs had also shared outdoor Afro, Latino outdoors, Melanin Base Camp, Unlikely Hikers, and other organizations and groups, she said, are doing a terrific job of getting underrepresented people outside and into nature. So it sounds like a lot of those groups have their own websites. Let's see. I'm
not familiar with these programs, but the titles, the names do infer or suggest rather targeted populations again, and that's another sort of iteration that I'm seeing in this program development, is that the public health community, in recognizing from very general demographic characteristics that there are certain regions and certain populations that are at greater risk in terms of health, particularly obesity and cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And so some of these programs, I believe, are targeting those locations or particular communities, including socioeconomic representation, in, again, not only to improve health, but to reduce health treatment costs for the individuals as well as for the health care system. That's another interesting twist that I'm seeing, is that health insurers are now coming into this because they're recognizing that if by paying for and promoting outdoor activity, outdoor experiences, they're reducing the amount of more serious disease and illness in their healthcare system, their costs are reduced. So there's another potential partner and collaboration, if you're interested in these sorts of programs, is to start to poke at or introduce yourself to the local insurance systems, because they're becoming more aware and more open to these discussions as well.
Okay, well, if there were not any more questions, I'll just scroll down. I don't see any more, but again, we are going to share some of the recommendations that others on the webinar shared, as well as what Dr. Wolf had mentioned that Naomi was working on. So we'll share some of these resources. Again, you can view this webinar again on demand at forestrywebinars.net. So thank you again, Dr. Wolf, for giving these two webinars. You have done an outstanding job, and we had a lot of participants, and I think that this was really timely research, sharing the research and sharing us ways that it is being delivered, that we can further the pollination of these programs through our respective communities. So I really appreciate you passing on this information to us. And thanks to everyone who joined the webinar. We have another upcoming webinar in the series on April 24th at 1 p.m., which is entitled Storm Resilient Urban Forests, the Role of Species Selection and Maintenance Pruning. And that's presented by Dr. Eric Wiseman of Virginia Tech. So hopefully we'll see you all again, and thanks again. Bye-bye, everyone.